Happening now, we'd like to welcome our viewers from across North America and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room, episode 93 for May the 2nd, 2018. My name is Wes Fryer, coming to you from Oklahoma City, where I'm the Director of Technology at the Cassidy School. And true to form, for the first week of May, we have exciting weather here. We actually have some tornadoes, but they're just south of us. It's no big deal. It's just another May night of tornadic activity here in central United States. And I'm joined by almost defended dissertation guru of all ed tech, Jason Neiffer, Missoula, Montana. Jason, how does it feel to have turned in your dissertation?
It feels pretty darn great. So went in on Sunday to my committee. I've been working on a presentation for my proposal and putting together some visuals to talk to my committee about. And with any luck, 1 week from now, we can make it official and say that I am finally done 10 years after I started with the doctoral program process. And I did a little math the other day. I've been in formal education 32 of my 44 years. So I think I need to be done with school now. So I have no registration in for fall 2018, pending good news next week in the results of my dissertation. And I am truly excited to be finally done with this process. And speaking of, I am a University of Montana student, but my day job is that I am the assistant director and curriculum director of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual school that happens to be located on the University of Montana campus, conveniently where my doctoral program is also at. And I like tech, as does Wes. And so lots of interesting news, of course, going on right now. So I want to start off with, and I was going to try to finally queue up an official EdTech SR breaking news bumper, but we're just going to have to go with like a that we do have some breaking news. Cambridge Analytica has announced that they are shutting down after what most news articles are calling alleged misuse of Facebook data. And for those of you unaware of the company, Cambridge Analytica was the behavioral or political behavioral company that is accused of utilizing apps that ask for too many permissions in certain quizzes a couple of years ago that supposedly have been used to suck up a bunch of data to build voter profiles that ultimately supported the Trump for presidency campaign in 2016. Of course,
and the Brexit campaign.
And the Brexit campaign. And actually, from my understanding, too, a number of smaller political campaigns in Central and Western Europe were also beneficiaries, I'll say with italics, of the Cambridge Analytica data set. And so I've seen a couple of different stories on this today. The company did say in a statement that it was the media coverage, and that they called it the siege of media coverage, had driven away basically all of their customers and suppliers, which means that they were no longer able to effectively operate as a data mining organization. I'm not really sure what to call them or how to analyze them. Political data organization, but under pressure from the economics of their situation, they are ultimately shutting down. And I did a couple of months ago suggest that we are in the era of a technology correction, that we're going to start scaling back and reconsidering some of our engagement with things like social media because of things like the Cambridge Analytics scandal. But it's interesting that they're starting to become very real losers in the post-discovery of how this particular data collection firm may have been used or misused in the 2016 election. So, Wes, I'm sure you're not surprised by this news.
Well, yeah, I mean, it would be interesting to see what happens, right? I mean, if you're going to prove to people that you're effective in swaying opinions and creating startling current events, it would seem that, that might be in your favor. But it's isn't it interesting, because we talked about Cambridge Analytica a long time ago, and I think I even made a foil hat that I wore on the show one night as we're talking about this kind of stuff, because it is challenging to filter out and try to determine noise and signal and all that when it comes to especially politics and the divisive, polarized environment in which we live. But yes, I'm not entirely surprised. It is, I think, a sign of the times, and we're going to It's going to be interesting with what Facebook does, right? I just dropped an article from today from CNN Money, CNN Tech, and it's about Facebook's conference. They've had the what's it called? It's S8 or something like that conference. It's not the right thing, but it's their developer conference that they've been having. And Mark Zuckerberg announced, among other things, a new dating app that they're going to be putting out, because of course Facebook knows more about us than anybody. So, to what degree will people yawn at this and just kind of plug along with their lives and think that it's not that big of a deal, and to what degree will meaningful change happen? And I really think that regulatory change is what is going to be most significant, because there's the threat of users quitting and things like that. But people are so invested in the platform of Facebook, and it would be so hard for another platform. In fact, I heard some people, and I don't have this article, but there was some conjecture saying that if there is regulation for Facebook at this point, scaling back, it could just even more solidify their, it's not a monopoly, but their very controlling market share, which they have, because that could prevent any other contenders from accumulating the quantity of information that we have. So, Jason, do you have any thoughts on what would you be telling students? We've brought this up. We have a good article on our digital citizenship website about this. I mean, some of the things that we've had very little feedback and need to look at more of the forums, but some of it is, we're not on Facebook, it doesn't matter to us. I mean, kids may just not really be tuning into that in terms of that demographic, since they're on Instagram and Snapchat. Instagram owned by Facebook, of course.
Right. Yeah, and we have a story about that too. We should probably mention in a moment. But I did laugh. I did see a couple of references today to the dating part of Facebook, and it was like, Facebook, if you're trying to become perceptually less skeezy, don't start a dating app. Like, that seems like it's a bit of a tone deaf piece. And I have no doubt that they could probably be extremely effective in the kind of matchmaker notion. But it's part of what's interesting to me about the whole online dating scene is that a lot of the systems rely on you to do things like fill out surveys and answer honestly pieces so they can try to match you with another person. I would imagine that with the pure depth of data that Facebook has, it's going to be a little more accurate in building a picture of you. Whether or not they can use that to then find a good match in another person for a romantic match is a whole different story. But yeah, that is a pretty fascinating development on the part of Facebook. So a couple other things are related to that. You mentioned Instagram, Wes, that apparently, and I think this came from the F8 conference, or the Fate conference went on earlier this week.
Something 8, yeah, I forget what the name of it was.
Yeah, F8 or something.
Developer, yeah.
Yep, it's the Facebook Developer Conference, and of course that comes at an enormously unique time. But one of the things that came out of that conference is apparently, Facebook has been using Instagram to help train artificial intelligence algorithms on how to spot various types of images. And that's something that Google has been doing for a long time. It's obviously something Facebook must have been doing because of how great their algorithm is of spotting your friends and photos, for example. But they are utilizing that huge data set. And we've talked mostly positively about big data on the EdTech Situation Room, but remember that big data comes from your data, right? Big data is only data because it takes a lot of little data and joins it together, and that's part of big data, right? If you want to create a machine that can identify photographs, you have to feed it an enormous amount of data that is tagged, and that's the great thing about Instagram photos is that oftentimes they are tagged with hashtags, as it turns out. That creates a means to kind of train a computer. But I'm sure that you didn't know this when you were signing up for Facebook/Instagram, but you agreed to allow for things like a logarithmic sniffing of your data as part of the kind of social media agreement.
Interesting. I'm trying to bring up our live chat because we've got a viewer out there, and I'm using a different laptop, and Peggy's there. Hello, Peggy. Restricted mode, interestingly, is blocks our video. I don't know if that's because all YouTube Live, perhaps. Maybe that's a YouTube Live thing that it gets blocked. But anyway, we're unblocked. If you are joining us live, please join us in our chat room. We are going to continue to break down the week's news and try and lend some educational analysis to that. And you can find all of our links at edtechsr.com/links. And I would add to what you were just talking about, Jason, regarding Facebook. And we had a speaker from the OU Medical Center talking about adolescence and then also preventing teen violence and school shootings and things like that last night. And they were talking about, how teens can fall prey with this polarized political environment to, parroting things and finding extreme voices. And just, it's so important that we help educate ourselves and others around us about filtering information and not just taking it from the mainstream fire hose, right? Whether that is, Fox or CNN or whatever your local, channels, news, if it bleeds, it leads. And there's just, there's so much that's going to, I think, continue to divide us. And so I would love to see, amidst all of the discussion about Facebook and algorithms, just an increase in media literacy and an increase in our ability to filter. And, perhaps, of course, this is all up to Facebook. They can give us some tools that can cause us to, sort of have the virtual wrenches to adjust some things and some streams. I mean, we've talked about that on the show. They've said, for a long time, they weren't a media company. They didn't want to be a media company. Now they've admitted, oh, okay, I guess we kind of are. And we've got a responsibility to certainly, look at extreme content and trying to prevent Facebook Live and their platform from being used in horrible ways. But yeah, the cause of learning how to filter information streams and, what kind of a digital newspaper do you want? I think AI is going to play a big role in that, but it's going to be interesting to see the role that regulation plays in all that. So do you want to take us to that other related article? Was it about Facebook dating, or was it about the people first, maybe?
It's the people first commitment. And if anything else, and this is just kind of the headlines out of that, the Facebook developer conference, but, Mr. Zuckerberg has doubled down and said that, this is an important moment for Facebook. It's important for us. We need to work to make sure that the work we're doing is bringing people together and not pulling them apart. And, there weren't, a ton of really super detailed pieces of that as the conference played on. In fact, I found relatively little media coverage on it when I dug a little bit this morning to find out if any specific initiatives have been announced. There's a lot of rhetoric at this point, but, it's an important moment for Facebook, and honestly, it's an important moment for social media, right? Like if, it turns out that, it's always going to cause more harm than good. And I wouldn't argue that's not really where we're at right now, because I can think of a lot more good that social media does in my life than harm. But I think we need to be conscious of it and, acknowledge that, that great things can be abused if you're not careful and thoughtful about their implementation. And that's as true about classroom technology as is to the broadly how technology is, significantly impacting our lives.
Absolutely. Well, I'd like to take us to actually an article. I will link it so you can click on it, because I was not very very good about getting my links in. But this is from April 28th, 2018, and it's called Remembering Today's Meet. And it's from James Sokol, who was the founder of Today's Meet. And one of the really important privacy-related news things that's happening, and I think it goes into implementation at the end of this month in May, is the GDPR. And I've said that enough with the full meaning of the acronym. It's the General Regulation on Data Privacy. And this is coming out of the EU. And so the regulation is going to force companies to do a lot of disclosure about where data is kept and I think making companies be a little more plain English with their disclosures, right? These 48-page iTunes acceptable use, things that can change at any time. And we know it's for the lawyers, but what am I agreeing to? And that kind of touches on the Cambridge Analytica thing as well, because it was actually an academic researcher who was using these quizzes to gain this information. But there's one of the tangible things, and if you haven't done this already, you need to, is take a look at all the apps that you've authorized Facebook to log into, all the apps you've allowed Google to log into. Be aware that if you're going to join that I'm quitting Facebook crowd, you could cut off account access. And so you really need to look at that and perhaps, see about transitioning your other web accounts to a just email and login instead of using Facebook. But anyway, this is an article that's the backstory of the creator of today's meet. He is an independent fellow who has run this wonderful back-channeling website for 10 years, and he's just not going to be able to meet the demands of the GDPR. And so he's closing up shop. And so it makes me wonder, how many smaller companies, smaller individuals even, are just going to have to throw their hands up when it comes to these data privacy regulations. And again, it could be a dark side to regulation and to the pushback against the Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, and all of this stuff. Because part of the promise of the internet, and it's the reality of it too, is that an individual can have an idea, can learn how to code, or, connect with folks who do, and can create a platform. And tools like Amazon's cloud, and there's the Google Cloud, Microsoft is in that mix. I mean, these are scalable tools that can really allow things to grow and have a life that wouldn't have been possible if you were just back in the early days where you had to run a physical server, from your location and pay for that internet connectivity. It's a very different day development wise. So I am mourning the loss of today's meet. It's a fantastic and has been a fantastic tool. I do think it's important for us as educational leaders and teachers and parents to be very attentive to data privacy. Actually, at my father-in-law's funeral, we had a conversation with my cousin who was involved with a small district. I think this was where his kids are in the Dallas area. But I mean, they didn't have HTTPS and some basic encryption on for some forms and for some student information things. And he ended up meeting with some people and asking some questions, and they've made some changes. I remember not that many years ago being in a workshop in the Dallas area, and there were some Dallas area technology departments and probably legal departments that really were questioning today's meet and some of these other tools because of this idea of, because of COPA and FERPA and these laws. And this idea that, if you were under 13, you shouldn't participate in it. So the last thing I'll say before I toss it to you is this idea of anonymous, chat and anonymous tools, because, I'm fortunate here living in central USA to not feel really chilled and oppressively restricted in my ability to express myself and to publish things. That is not the reality in different parts of the world, certainly in parts of the Middle East, some countries I've, traveled to and been able to present in, where journalists are disappeared still, and people are killed and people are arrested. And it's not a situation of people being empowered to speak freely. And so it's important that we have tools that allow people to anonymously express themselves. There certainly is a dark side to, open chat, and you can have this happen just in a classroom with kids, right? If they think there's no accountability, then you're going to have some kids do some stuff that's probably not appropriate. And so I think it's important from a digital citizenship standpoint. But that said, good article. I like the way that James Sokol gave really a lot of backstory to today's meet, how it grew, how it developed, how it really was an outgrowth of the feedback he got from educators that took him on this 10-year journey. But very sad that that's coming to a close.
I would add two things to this. The first thing, that this whole today's meet thing is interesting to me because of the other services that are also adapting and modifying their service based on these new rules in the EU. And I guess one of the things that keeps coming to mind to me is that how global is the world, right? Like, obviously, the European Union represents, hundreds of millions of users. So obviously companies cannot ignore that large of a group, but we are really impacted by what the European Union does in regards to technology regulation, as we are a truly independent world, especially relates to the internet. And we talked about the so-called right to be forgotten. This was probably a year or so ago here on the podcast, and that is a European Union notion that if information is dated and no longer relevant, which is a very, very loose standard, then they've ruled in the European Union that a user can go to a Google or a Bing or a DuckDuckGo and say, hello, this information is no longer relevant. Here's the proof. And then it just goes away. So, for example, let's say like a DUI conviction. You're accused of a crime. You do your time. You complete whatever restitution is part of that. And after a few years, you feel like that information is no longer relevant, and in fact maybe biases you, even though you've so-called paid your debt to society. That people feel like that information should go away. And although that has not sparked as much change in the internet as I think people estimated at the time, let's not forget that what happens in the European Union will impact the rest of the world in regards to how the technology works. And so we need to be cautious.
Tying it back to Facebook, that's one of the things we're watching to see if the restrictions that Europe is going to require for their citizens and for folks living inside the EU are going to be isolated by Facebook, and the rest of the world is going to have sort of a different privacy standard, or if those restrictions are going to basically be applied broadly to everyone. I think there's been some quotations of Zuckerberg saying, he's going to apply those everywhere. And so the increased focus on disclosure and, simplifying or at least clarifying some of the permissions and things like that is going to come to everybody. But I think it's, it's going to cut both ways. And so while I think we've done a lot of hand-wringing over privacy, of course, we've mentioned this before on the show, our tendency as a government is to the pendulum to swing too far one way. And I think somebody who actually talked to Zuckerberg when he was under the grill a week or so ago, I saw a clip of this congressman or senator, I don't know, legislator, and he said, remember, we're either basically with our heads in the sand, not doing anything, out of touch, or we're, grossly overreacting. And that's perhaps what we'll see, but maybe not. And I do think it's pretty instructive that Europe is leading in this regard. I think we in the United States tend to kind of feel like Silicon Valley, and we are and have the innovation, have had the leading edge of innovation in so much of technology, and Silicon Valley is what, people want to try and replicate. But this, build it and, build it fast, see if it breaks, try to make it again. It has repercussions, and I think it has repercussions far beyond what, Zuckerberg would have ever imagined in his college dorm room that it could have. And even today, I think I regret at this point that there's not more direct accountability for him. I think we kind of give him a free pass, like, this is your company, so yeah, you made a mistake, so just go back and try this again. If this was a different company, I think heads would roll, and it would include the CEO. And so it's in some ways kind of fascinating, and they're kind of a unicorn in that respect, perhaps, that he's going to get a free pass. How many free passes is he going to get? As there's been some good articles about, how many apologies throughout the years, and this is just another apology from them. So,
yep, there it is.
All right.
Okay.
One other thing on today's meet, I'm going to see about running a local instance of EtherPad. I'll put this link into the chat. I was able to, last leap year, sometimes we've got I guess I'll put this on as a Geek of the Week. And I can talk about it there. So I'll throw in EtherPad because, hey, this could be your local version of a today's meet. But I'll talk about that later.
Okay, great. So moving on to maybe a broader geeky thing, T-Mobile and Sprint have announced that they will be attempting to unify forces, and I believe it's merging. I don't think one is buying or one's buying the other, although my understanding is that we'll probably they'll keep the name T-Mobile, and we'll recognize the current CEO of T-Mobile, who is somewhat of a a larger than life character will continue to be the CEO of the new combined company. But after like years, 2 or 3 years of rumors and fits and starts and broken negotiations, T-Mobile and Sprint, that's the number 3 and number 4 mobile provider in the United States, will be joining forces to become one company. And I've seen some various accounts for this. Basically, it becomes now, from a user standpoint, amongst the top 3 competitors for the top. They're not. I don't know if there's I've read conflicting information of whether or not they'll be the largest company or just amongst the 3 largest companies, but they certainly are going to rocket from the 3rd and 4th spots to be something a little more proactive. So both Wes and I are T-Mobile users. I guess maybe that's full disclosure. We're both fans of the service. First, Wes, are you concerned about T-Mobile joining forces with Sprint?
No, I don't think so. I think that they need to be giving a better run for the money with Verizon and with AT&T. We're T-Mobile customers. I think you are as well, because it's been a better value. There's been more bandwidth. I mean, shockingly, more bandwidth available. Our kids have not really ever had to deal with this. Oh, I ran out, of bandwidth, which has been a reality for a lot of folks. I'll try to find the link, but T-Mobile and Sprint have a website promoting 5G, because they're really wrapping this whole thing in, talking about leadership for the United States and how we need to lead in 5G. And so I'll pull that out, but it's, I guess going to give them a lot more money that they're going to be able to invest. And, I'm amazed that the CEO of T-Mobile can get away with the profanity that he gets away with. And I'm not not saying he's the best representative of ethical, CEOs or whatever. I don't know. Maybe he's a great guy, all that side stuff to the side. But I'm glad to see it. I want that company to continue to thrive. I want to see us continue to have competition. It's really important. And we need more than 2 competitors. They need to be meaningful competitors. And we've talked about this on the show, but it sticks in my mind that when you talk about 5G with folks and the way that people think this is going to usher in a new revolution, LTE and 4G, brought us Airbnb and Uber and Lyft and these different kinds of companies that can be, utilizing live data. But LTE 4G today, if we're downloading a 2 to 3 gig video, like a DVD size, it's going to take about 30 minutes. They're saying over 5G, that's going to be like 2 or 3 seconds. So we're really talking about a tremendous leap forward. And, part of the stuff John Laguerre, or however you say his name, the T-Mobile CEO is saying, is that, X number of jobs are going to be created. And I don't know. I mean, who knows as far as that kind of economic voodoo to make that kind of a prediction. But I will say that this is going to have a sizable impact on our schools. And when students are, pocketing a device that has perhaps hundreds of times more bandwidth than you have today on your entire network, and they can make a hotspot and they can, service the whole classroom. Wow, that's going to be really different. And it probably will start to beg the question at some point of our school networks in urban areas, right? This is also going to continue to be a rural-urban divide kind of issue. So I'm excited about it. And I think that we need to continue on the regulatory side to really advocate for universal service, to not leave rural America behind. Montana, like Oklahoma, very rural state. And so companies will tend to want to look just at return on investment and looking at those large metropolitan areas. And that's where we need to have, Title II, regulation, the FCC, folks advocating to say, hey, we need electrification everywhere. Hey, we need to have, broadband internet everywhere. Right. And at one point, Verizon, and they may have gotten this to pass, right, was trying to get their device that allows you to have dial tone over the cellular network to substitute for the mandate for universal service and providing copper dial tone everywhere. And in part of that, too, with internet, they were trying to say that 5 megs down was plenty, that was high speed. And so those definitions are going to continue to blur and change. And I think that we'll continue to see pressure, on schools and challenges about access and that sort of thing, just because what we're going to have in our pockets or implanted in our brains or wherever it's going to be on our watches. Not me yet, but anyway, that's going to continue to blow minds. So I'll find this website and drop this into the show notes.
Sure. One last thing I would say about this is that I worried a little bit about the risk to unlimited data. But every article I've read suggested that unlimited data is the reality of mobile plans now, and so it's unlikely that T-Mobile will go in that direction. The other piece that's also interesting is that a lot of analysts think that you are less likely to spot deals with T-Mobile. T-Mobile pretty frequently will have pretty enticing deals to bring people into their system, including if you have 4 phones, you can get them for $40 a month, and unlimited data for each phone. For a long time, you had to get 4 phones to get that $40 a month price. There are deals that go in and out where you can do 2 phones for $40 a piece, or 1 phone for $60 a piece. And there have been a lot of great deals, one of which brought me over to T-Mobile originally about a year and a half ago. And again, I've never looked bad. I've been extremely happy with it. The other practical reality is that starting pretty soon, your phone will be able to roam on the other network. In other words, Sprint will roam on T-Mobile, and T-Mobile will roam on Sprint towers with 100% speed and be able to hand things back and forth. And so that's another new thing that, especially if you're in a larger urban area that has good coverage with both, or maybe a decent coverage with one and better coverage with the other, then you should see slightly better cell speeds and maybe hands off from towers to tower. So it's always sad to lose a competitor, but we do have 3 large, prosperous large super mobile groups in the United States, and I hope they continue to compete and drive prices down and make internet more available to the masses.
Absolutely. That website is all45g.com, and that's Sprint and T-Mobile's pro-merger 5G information website. So
nice.
Let's talk a little bit of Google, updating on an article from last week. We had lots of Google updates, and I did approve, of course, the optional at this point update to the new Gmail, and have had some positive feedback. I have not been able to find the lock that evidently allows you to restrict what people can do. And I've looked for that. I need to do some more hunting, because that's one of the features where you're able to supposedly to say you can't forward this email, or this email will expire. Right. I don't know where that
found it either. Yeah.
I don't know where it is. I thought maybe one of my extensions was taking it off, and I checked with some other people. In at least one case, I had a user that needed to log out of her account in order to see the option to enable that. But that's been positive, and I think I've enjoyed a little bit the ability to more quickly, just scan over the subject lines of emails in the browser view, and being able to, I haven't done much snoozing, but being able to archive or delete. But one of the things that I think we referenced briefly, and I don't know that if we could have talked about this article, but this is from How To Geek on April 26th. Hey, Google, why do you have 4 different task apps? Did we talk about this one last week?
We haven't. Okay. Please do though.
Yeah. So this is really important, because if you've read or you check out the Getting Things Done book by David Allen, the GTD, which is part of it, like Inbox Zero and this dream that maybe I'll live someday with Inbox Zero. You're not supposed to have your mail inbox as your to-do list, and you really need to process through that according to this workflow and efficiency model. And then you have a trusted place where you put things that you can't quickly process through. And so anyway, I have been using Todoist because it connects with the Google Home, and I think that's kind of cool. But I've tried a variety of different task apps through the years, and Google has this new one. I am, by the way, definitely using their grocery list, but that was one of the things brought out by this article. So Google has a new task app that you can not access directly within the mail app or the mail interface of Gmail, but you can have an app for your Android or your iPhone. But then they've still got this grocery list that's a separate, website that's different, and all these pieces don't come together. So Jason, clarify this for us. Where can we go for task list nirvana? I'm sure you have surveyed the landscape, and you can set me straight.
Well, here's the problem with me and task lists. A long time ago, I decided, or I figured out that I can't use a digital task list. I have to do it on paper. And so I carry around I guess my innovation in that space is that I used to carry around composition notebooks. They're free for $1 during back to school time. You can stock up, and I have quite a few of them. But what I figured out pretty quickly was that and I have a couple binder clips sticking on mine, and then usually it's full of other paper notes, and so it's what I carry with me everywhere. What I figured out, though, was that digging out that composition notebook in particularly professional meetings, looked pretty pedestrian. So it was usually pretty ratty, and and those things last forever, but they do take some damage, and they got coffee cup rings on them, and weather snot and other things. So but what I figured out was that there is a large contingency, and I bought mine on Etsy. I bought a kind of a faux leather cover for it, and so it just slips right on over the top, and it is a beautiful notebook that I feel like I can pull out in a professional context. And so I'm not probably the best person for this, but I will say that my wife and I, because it plugs into Google Home, have used Wunderlist as a joint to-do list, or not to-do list, but joint grocery shopping list. And to be honest, it's pretty wonky. There are times when Allison will be at the store and she'll check things off the list, and the next time I go in the store, it's still on the list. Or I'll, halfway through a shopping trip, I'll be going through the list, and there's things on there I don't recognize because I didn't add them on there. My wife did, and I'll have them in the cart, and then after I open the app 2 or 3 minutes later, 4 or 5 of the things disappear off of there because they were checked off previously, and the app is just catching up. So I am encouraged by the fact that Google is continuing to innovate in this space, but I couldn't agree more with the notion. Come on, pick one and then just integrate it everywhere. Don't create different integrations for different sets and tools. So I have no help here.
What about the Rocketbook? Have you given Rocketbooks a shot? You know about that?
I do know about Rocketbooks. I don't really ever scan or do anything with my information. So for me, the paper book works out pretty well. When I do need to scan something, the Adobe PDF app or one of the 100 pretty great scanning apps on phones are good enough to turn that into an image to save later. So I do have a friend that swears by Rocketbooks, however. She is a very prolific note taker and finds the Rocketbook to be a great solution. And there are a number of great different kinds of notebooks now. I'm kind of I wouldn't say I'm that much of a notebook snob because I use composition notebooks, of which are cheap and plentiful, but I'm also vaguely interested in the notion of bullet journaling. That's the kind of artistic journaling movement that I do it mostly so I can post semi-mocking things about my, kind of half not well decorated bullet journal. But for me, the paper stuff is really where it's at for me. But I could be convinced by another list system, but every time I've gotten into an app, it just felt clunky and not flexible enough to do what I wanted it to do.
I'm not familiar with bullet journaling, so it's bulletjournal.com. I'll drop that in. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, and if you go, probably the best way to look at it, if you go on Instagram and search for the hashtag bullet journal, a lot of people like posting on their bullet journals. It's a touch culty, but it's great though because it does encourage people to kind of use an artistic notion to encourage them to plan and organize. And you mentioned David Allen. I am a David Allen devotee myself. I've never been able to fully implement his system because it seems to take a little more bandwidth than I have to give. But I love this notion of to-do lists. I love next action lists. And I also say the other reason why I like a paper one is there's something just so satisfying about crossing off something off the to-do list. And, I think that's a big piece of it for me in regards to task managers.
And let's do a shout out for folks in schools that we need to not assume everyone out there will just magically know how to process their email, handle all their tasks, do all this stuff. We need to provide some tools and share our pain and our learning points. I am excited that we do this end of days series of meetings professionally after the kids get out before graduation. And I do have a getting organized in Google Drive session that I'm going to repeat twice. And I will, be working to get some things together about task lists and some of these other things, because yeah, project management, just managing your life, managing distraction, all of these are big challenges for everyone, and we shouldn't just assume people can do that. Do you want to pick up that last Google article from The Verge about the Google Assistant startups? I was excited about that.
The Verge reports that Google is starting to heavily invest into startups that are working on Google Assistant, and I think the term is plugins, maybe, but they're pieces of functionality for the Google Assistant, and that's really interesting to me for a couple of different reasons. First, as I've mentioned a few times in the past, intelligent personal assistants was the topic of my dissertation, so I'm deep in that particular research. But I feel as though that the Siri has lagged behind a bit, and one of the reasons why is because even though they opened up APIs, app developers don't seem to have really jumped on the notion that you can connect an app on the iOS platform to Siri, right? Like, I haven't seen anything, and I'm just an iPad user as opposed to an iPhone user, but I haven't seen anything to suggest that there's a lot being done in that space. Whereas Amazon has a dominant number of, they call them recipes, tasks, widget something. They have a large number of those skills. And
for the record, you have one of those in your home. So
I do. Yeah, a couple of them actually. But skills is what they're called, and the Amazon skills for their products. There's a large number of them, of which 90% of them are at best parlor tricks or junk. But the 10% that are there are, overlord over the Google Assistant and the Siri platforms. And so that tells me that Google's getting serious about this, and that, remember, it's not just in the objects in your home. Google Assistant is built into most newer Android phones, or can be put on to even older Android phones now. So this notion of creating an interesting piece is pretty great. So I'm very excited about the prospects of IPAs getting even more functional in the environment.
Awesome. Well, we've got some Apple news and some Microsoft news. Why don't we go to Apple, and I'll take the airport article. Maybe you can do the iPhone X. Fortune magazine, not fortunate, I need to change that, reports on April 28th that Apple is killing its router Wi-Fi hotspot airport line. And so they will be continuing to support, I think I was hearing maybe for 5 years. So don't fret if you're like us. We've had, an airport router for quite a while, but they are not going to be continuing that. That's been something rumored for quite a while. I think the folks who were working in that department of Apple actually got moved into a different area. And so, people were reading those tea leaves and saying a while back that was probably not going to be a growth area. But they also announced, let's see, where was this? Was that the iTunes thing? It was something about Windows and iTunes. I didn't actually. Oh, okay. Oh, well, that was the payoff. Yeah. Huh. A big move in the Microsoft Windows world where the company's iTunes is more readily accessible. I don't know. Anyway, do you know any Windows users that run iTunes? I run it on my Android. I do. I do like having my Apple Music there, but that's because I was living in that world, and my family still is. So
right. Well, and I used an airport for a long time. I feel like that the airport really set the stage for what Google's doing now, the kind of elegant home, managed by an app system. I used to love to be able to tweak things and make sure firmware was updated with my iPad and iPhone when I had that as network architecture. And it's always a little sad to see those Apple products be depreciated, partially because they all work so well together. And so if you are a Mac person and you are deep in the Apple ecosystem, everything just talks so elegantly together. So, I will say that we do have more well thought through Wi-Fi products than we did when the Apple airport was maybe a necessary component. As opposed to, then when there wasn't a whole lot and most Wi-Fi routers were, seemed like a bit of magic and luck to get things to work. So it's a different market than it used to be, but I am sad to see that particular product go.
quick shout out to a related article, best mesh router system, Eero versus Orbi versus Google Wi-Fi versus VLOP. This is actually just by a blogger, Power Moves, on April 18th. I am continuing to contemplate that switch. And while he does give the Google Wi-Fi a positive review, he really says that the Eero Gen 2 is fantastic, and then puts Linksys VLOP above it. Both of those, they say, are faster in terms of transfer and performance than the Google Wi-Fi, but Google Wi-Fi is just drop dead simple, and it works. And so any of those next generation Wi-Fi mesh-ish solutions are going to be a positive for your home connectivity. Right.
And I have a complete side note. Earlier on in the podcast, for those of you that are longtime listeners to the podcast, know that I for a long time I was experiencing issues with Wi-Fi in my home, and I suspected that it was some kind of weird mojo in my house as opposed to the actual devices. And I have a new theory about this. And I should drop this in. Maybe I'll talk about it a little more next week and drop it in the Geek Week next week. But I was trying to find some drivers for an older Windows laptop. This was 3 or 4 years old that is not supported in Windows 10, the new version of Windows 10 that we'll talk about in a moment. Well, I was surprised by that fact. But the company, it was an HP laptop. HP was no longer providing Windows 10 drivers, so it wouldn't automatically find drivers with the HP Support Assistant. And so I found an open source application that scans and downloads updated drivers, and they look for optimal drivers, even if they're older. So if Windows or your manufacturer has downloaded a driver that's not as optimal or functional. And one of the things that I discovered when I did this with my desktop computer, which I have had Wi-Fi problems on, was that there was a Wi-Fi driver update available, and I updated the driver on my Wi-Fi on that desktop, and it immediately became much more stable of a platform. And so I guess maybe the note here is that I still think Wi-Fi is not nearly as consistent and as easy to manage in the home as it should be, but it could be even the hardware you're bringing to the game in regards to your laptop or desktop. So update drivers, an important part of that process.
Yeah, and then we've talked about this on a security note. Maybe you're going to update your firmware, maybe you're just going to update your whole hardware, but that needs to be part of what we do. You buy a rake, it probably stays in your garage forever, and you don't need to upgrade your rake. That's not the case with networking gear, whether that's your modem connecting to your internet provider, or that's your Wi-Fi or your router, whatever.
Yep.
Hey, what about this iPhone X? Rumor from CNBC.
Yeah, so CNBC reported yesterday, and this was amongst a number of media outlets, to suggest that according to manufacturing sources of people that make the display for the iPhone X, they're ramping down. And so the way the market is reading most of this is that Apple is going to move away from that particular device. I'm a little more mixed by that notion, because I know sales have been low, and everyone that either has direct knowledge of it or indirect knowledge of it says that's not sold nearly as Apple thought it might, because being kind of the high-end purveyor of hardware. But it could be that there's going to be an iPhone X2 or an iPhone X .2 or something along those lines. It wouldn't surprise me, because Apple's done this in the past, where a second iteration of a less than desirable product ends up hitting the sweet spot from price and functionality. The part that it does inspire, though, is that it seems like a lot of Android manufacturers have copied Apple, and that they're releasing $999 phones or $1,000 phones or $1,100 phones with premium options. But I wonder if Apple ends up going away from the iPhone X. Will Android be left kind of out in the open? And Apple did have an earnings call on, I can't remember if this was this week or last week. Apparently the sales were stagnant, but profits were up, which means Apple, even though we're all talking about the end of Apple, and there's a ton of hand-wringing media about that, they're still pulling in money like crazy. So
absolutely. All right, well, let's talk some quick Microsoft. You are the Windows guru in my life. Actually, I have a few, but what's going on with this Windows 10 update?
Sure. Well, so remember, Windows is no longer like new versions of Windows, right? We won't see a Windows 11 or Windows 19 or Windows 2020 or Windows 2020. It's now just Windows 10, and every 6 months, Microsoft releases an update that is not just security updates. It comes with a number of new features, and so April brought a new update to Windows, and it's interesting because this actually was supposed to roll out several weeks ago, but there were some sort of issues related to a lot of early adopters were starting to get blue screens of death, or BSODs as they're known colloquially, which is a word I can barely get out of my mouth. In the nerd world, but there's not a ton of super exciting features, but I didn't want to talk about a couple of them. First and foremost, there's a new feature that's called Timeline, which is kind of a different way to look at what's going on your computer. It replaces what Windows had called Task View, which was a very Mac OS OS 10 like architecture. Would show you all open windows in kind of an expose feature and allow you to access multiple desktops. I've played with this feature for only a few minutes on one of the laptops that I updated, and it seems fine. I mean, it's visually very pleasing. I think Windows 10 is, in my mind, is the most visually interesting of all of Microsoft's operating systems, and that continues that process. There's also an easy way to get dictation in Windows. Windows has had a variety of interesting dictation tools on and off over versions of Windows, but they've now brought in a hotkey, so you can go Windows key and H on your keyboard and dictate into any app. So also very Mac-alike. That's a feature that has been around in Mac for a bit of time. And then there's some visual updates, particularly related to apps that they're blurry on big high definition screens that they then crank down the resolution on to make everything crisper. Well, not every app worked well there, and so there's a new design language that looks at some of those apps. And then more subtle things like what's so-called quick Bluetooth pairing, that sort of thing, is part of that. The other one that's also seems kind of stolen, well, is stolen in my mind from the Apple world. There's something called quick sharing now. My understanding is limited to pictures, but I'm sorry, pictures, documents, and websites. It's very similar to Apple's AirDrop feature, but essentially two people can open up on the same Wi-Fi network, the sharing feature, spot one another, and then be able to share documents and photos back and forth.
Speaking of which, do you know of a good way to do that Chromebook to Mac? Because AirDrop is phenomenal. I mean, that is a magical thing, fast story. I've been able to help several of our teachers with some great ebook projects. And most recently, our 7th grade English teacher had her 73 kids all do books, and about half of them chose to do ebooks. They went to read these books that they wrote to a local elementary school, to kindergarten, first graders. And so when she was saying she needed to do this, I said, let's just AirDrop the books. And so she had all the library iPads and 32 books all at once. Boom, drop them there. They all whoosh off to iBooks. It's a beautiful thing. It's truly magical. So is there a way you would recommend taking pictures or other content from and I said a Chromebook, from an Android device, and then being able to throw that? I mean, I'd like to do Chromebook to Mac as well, but Android to Apple, is there a good tool for that?
My guess is what you're looking for there is AirDroid. Okay. Is probably the easiest, and there's a free version of that and a paid version. It's how I you log in through a browser in essence and be able to quickly transfer things back and forth to your phone. That's probably the closest to that.
Okay, excellent.
And pretty great.
I want to throw in two kind of blow your mind articles. First one, this is from Ozzy. Never heard of this. It's not Ozzy Osbourne. It's just OZY from April 29th. This geneticist is creating gene-edited animals for our plates. We've talked about CRISPR, which is this incredible technology that snips the genetic code and lets geneticists take out something and then put something in the area where enzymes connect it. And so this is an article about Alison van Eenenam, and she has snipped the genetic code of female cows so that they're born without horns. And it's evidently very painful to dehorn dairy cows, and they need, they feel like they need to do that to prevent farmers and others from, getting gored. And so this is just really a big deal. And it's a fascinating article. It's another one about CRISPR. CRISPR is one of those technologies to watch and to let kids know about. If you can get any students, oriented towards genomics, genetics, biotech, it's an industry of the future. I should probably be investing right now if I had disposable income to do that on companies that are doing these kinds of things. And it's also interesting how they talk about that GMOs are different from genetic changes that CRISPR does. So that was a great article. And then this one blew my mind. New York Times, April 26th, how a genealogy site led to the front door of the Golden State Killer suspect.
How did I not put this one at the top of this week? We should pick up back on this topic next week. But I think I had mentioned that I did. I can't remember which one it was, but I did one of the ancestry blood things, and it was as I expected, and it found my aunt who was I knew was on there already, but this seems to have such. Well, actually, we should say maybe talk about what the Golden State Killer, 30-year-old crimes. They had DNA samples, but they didn't have anything to match it with in the databases. So it sounds like what they did is they grabbed one of these kits for $99. They somehow inserted the DNA into the little bottle and corked it up, sent it in the mail, fake name. Send it off to whatever the service was.
And they said it wasn't Ancestry.com or 23andMe, but there's other companies that do this.
Right. And then based on that, they were given a genetic report that included relatives of the accused serial killer, right? So this seems to have such shocking constitutional implications to me. And when I first read this, it blew my mind because I thought this was so totally cool. Like when I did this, it was very interesting. It pointed out some things I didn't really know. I've got all these eighth cousins running around the United States. I had no frame of reference to be paranoid that I've now exposed myself to overzealous law enforcement.
And it's not just you. It's because this was not saying that everyone's going to have to be in the genetic code. It found because this guy who was arrested or whatever as this killer, there were relatives of his that had done that, and they were able to trace back and then cross-reference, other kinds of databases to find somebody in that age demographic. And so what it means is this menu of genetic information, even if you don't participate and send in your DNA, law enforcement and authorities, and that also means other, less scrupulous individuals and entities will be able to get that kind of information and use it. So I think we would all agree that, if indeed, and it appears it is, this is the killer. Great that they've been brought to justice. Great example. But like you, Jason, I listened to this actually, I think first on my Google Home, news, and then looked up the article and just my jaw dropped because I said, oh my gosh, here it is. This is one of the things that civil liberty defending organizations have been talking about in the ways in which these things can be utilized for ways that people never intended. And I think it even goes beyond that because we're talking about people in your genetic family. And so you may not decide to participate, but because others have, then the cat's out of the bag. So this is obviously a good case of law enforcement arresting someone that, had done terrible things. And, it's not a case of the innocents, but gosh, where does it go next? Maybe we can talk about it a little bit more on the next show, because that's probably something we can dive into even deeper and probably read a little more of some analysis and where some, with the EFF and on that.
Well,
any
sir,
shall we before Geeks of the Week?
I think we should Geek of the Weekend. I think we've done a pretty good job of covering our load here.
Okay, I'll go. EtherPad, etherpad.org. This is a free open source tool that allows you to synchronously create documents together. And some of the websites that used to host this for free have since gone offline. But I actually think I may run this at school. I think it's very, very powerful to have tools like this that you can edit live. And I love how this has the colors one of the things I love about EtherPad is you have a document you create, and then there's a chat area over to the side, because that's one of the things that people tend to want to do when they're in a live synchronous environment is, oh, let's have a chat. So you got a space to do that over on the side, and then you have a document that you build, and everybody, gets their own color. So absolutely love that. And then main one that I put was this Chromebook inventory add-on for Google Sheets. We are we are ordering a refresh of one of our Chromebook carts. And then I'm excited that we're going to, looks like, add a 7th cart at our middle school. And I needed to grab the inventory. And so you can't just do that, interestingly, as an export straight out of your Google admin panel. But this is an add-on for Google Sheets by New Visions Lab. And it's a little old, but still works. And it pulls all that data down and lets you have that to sort and process however you would like. So Chromebook inventory for Google Sheets.
And then I like to point out that I thought maybe this had been covered previously when during my absence, but I didn't find it in the document. Adobe has announced Adobe Spark for Education, which is a premium version of Adobe Spark for schools, and it's completely free. And so what's really interesting about that is that it not only adds in all the premium features you usually have to pay for in Adobe Spark, it also allows you, or it also set up in a way that is mindful of student data and privacy. And so we've started setting up this tool at the Digital Academy. It's going to require some setup on our Google email system. We have to register back and forth to make sure domain names are accounted for, yada, yada, yada. But basically, it's going to allow, my understanding is going to allow for single sign-on from Google. It will recognize you as a MTDA student or faculty when you log in from a specific email address. And then you get access to that extremely premium tool, which is web-based and also on iOS devices. I'm hoping for an Android version of Adobe Spark at some time in the near future. I'm a Canva user, so Canva is my Adobe Spark-like product. And I've got an impressive library of interesting, great designs in Canva now, but it'd be very tempting for me to maybe move towards Adobe Spark now that a premium version would be free to me as an educational user.
Fantastic. Adobe Spark has a great video app that we've just loved on the iPad. That's just wonderful for the menus and wizards that it provides. And then Adobe Spark Post is my favorite tool for creating InfoPix, which I think is a highly underutilized product that definitely speaks to our visual society and our media centric society. And so it's a great product to make. So we are the EdTech Situation Room. Generally, you find us here at 8 p.m. Mountain, 9 p.m. Central. Even if there's tornadoes or other natural disasters, we'll just get on the show and make others in our home quit streaming and go onto their T-Mobile devices for an hour. But we can find all of our links on edtechsr.com/links. We encourage you to also follow us on Twitter at edtechsr. You'll find Jason and my Twitter handles there. Jason, where can people reach out to you? And are you going to be taking a bit of a lapse from writing? I can't imagine you might be tired of writing, but when you write, will you be sharing aside from your dissertation committee on May 8th?
Sure. I'm working on a number of things right now. I have a couple of longstanding blog posts that I've been working on for some time that I haven't really had the time due to other writing projects to put into fruition. The one I'm most excited about, and I've started putting together some media on it, is that I am going to, based on a suggestion from a student and a parent in our organization, and also a conversation I had with a couple of teachers at the NCC conference in February in Seattle, I'm going to spend an entire day working only on my cell phone. I'm going to try to do my job 100% from a cell phone. And I'm obviously going to, I can't really pull that off. I can pull an awful lot off on my cell phone, but I'm going to look at different options, including a Bluetooth keyboard as an option, hooking up a mouse to it as an option. And then ultimately, my goal would be to actually have a docking station I have working with my phone. So I'm going to write a long post about that and probably post that up on the NCC Tech Savvy Teacher blog.ncc.org. And then I'm also going to start posting long form articles that I work on Medium because it's interesting and I want to learn more about the platform.
Absolutely.
What about you, Wes?
Well, I have shared a few things on Medium, and it's interesting because when you kind of want something to perhaps have a greater reach, send it out there. It's a good platform. But speedofcreativity.org is my normal spot. I helped my wife put up a blog post. She hadn't done one since September on her website, shelleyfryer.com. I need to be posting a little bit more, but podcast is there, and I'm looking forward to hopefully sharing a couple summer workshops and the new website, which will be continuing to take shape this summer, is Make Media Camp. So makemediacamp.com. And I hope to get a location confirmed for June 25th through the 27th in the Seattle area. And then also July 10th through the 12th here in Oklahoma City. Got to get those things nailed down. So thank you for joining us. We encourage you to share feedback with us. And if you can, join us live. Until next time, stay savvy and stay safe. And keep sharing generously. Even though Cambridge Analytica and all this Facebook news is here, there's great digital sharing benefits. We just have to watch, the platforms we give all our information to.